Good evening from our headquarters in Kiev. This is The Sunday Show at Hromadske International, the only prime-time television program explaining Eastern European geopolitical storm in English, and I'm Natalia Humenyuk. And it could be difficult to imagine probably a half year ago that those people would be representing the couple of the front runners during the snap election campaign. We have Anastasia Krasnosilska, who still is and who was an activist of the and the expert of the initiative which was fighting corruption, and currently is the #1 at the party list of the Servant of the People, the party of the president. Number 8. Number 8. That's what was clarified. Number 8 in the party of the Servant of the People of Volodymyr Zelenskyy, currently Ukrainian president, and Ivan Prymachenko, who is number 23 in the party list of the party Voice, founded by the Svyatoslav Vakarchuk. And Ivan, we know for a while as a educational technology innovator and the co-founder of one of the largest Ukrainian open online course, Prometheus, and which was interesting. You are both quite known in the civil society. Now you're in politics, and so we would like to discuss that. But prior to that, I would like to show the polls, the recent polls produced by the sociological group Rating. It was done on the June 29th, July 3. So according to the poll and the question, who would Ukrainians vote for in snap elections? We have the Servant of the People, 42.3%, and the Opposition Platform for Life with Viktor Medvedchuk running it around 13%. Former President Poroshenko, European Solidarity, 8.3%. Svyatoslav Vakarchuk, Golos, the Voice Party, 7.42%, and Yulia Tymoshenko, Batkivshina Party, 7.2%. And we have to say that there are 2,500 respondents and margin of error no more than 2%. So welcome to the studio. Great to have you just 2 weeks prior to the elections. I probably start with the hardest. Anastasia, you're a fierce anti-corruption fighter. Your organization was very much known for that. And now the question is, one of the questions to the President Zelensky and his team, that there are still the people whom the Ukrainian civil society has questions. For instance, like Andriy Bogdan, who is the head of the presidential office. There are still questions about his connection to oligarch Kolomoisky. There was also the promises by the President Zelensky that there would be an open competition for a lot of positions in the government, and not in the government in the English way, that people who represent the authorities, for instance, for the governors, for the head of SBU. But we have Ivan Bakanov, a close person to President Zelensky, as now de facto running the security service of Ukraine. We have the kind of not really an open competition for the governors. How do you feel about that? Do you feel comfortable? What do you answer on that?
I'm more used to judging by actions. For example, the first thing President Zelensky did, his first legal initiative for the parliament, was reintroducing the draft law on reintroducing criminal liability for illicit enrichment. Moreover, introducing a very good instrument of civic forfeiture of unexplained assets of public officials. This was the draft law, which was much better and much more elaborate that any draft law offers on illicit enrichment for the parliament, and this was a huge plus. So this was actually something that's kind of built up trust for good intentions in terms of fighting corruption for Mr. Zelensky, our president.
Still, maybe I would ask, so how do you feel with the cooperation with the team of President Zelensky? Because it's quite a diverse team of the people who probably not were so known in the civil society.
Well, for example, the person who is now responsible for anti-corruption, judicial reform, and continuing law enforcement reform in presidential administration is Mr. Ryabashapka, who is well known among civil society, who tried his pro-reform potential in the agency for fighting corruption, understood this was not working, and actually quit, not becoming corrupt, not becoming politically dependent. And I may say that cooperating with, for example, Mr. Ryabashapka is a pleasure.
Ivan, first of all, let me know why you joined the party, but also Svyatoslav Vakarchuk always says that this is a party just for the new people. The number of the people whom we know as a Euro-optimist and members of parliament were not invited really, and still Svyatoslav Vakarchuk was in the parliament himself. He also claims that it's a kind of ideological party, but we still see the party is very much built around the name of Vakarchuk, and as well, he's himself not a professional politician, but a singer. So what makes also your party very much different from the President Zelenskyy party and the CERN of the people? Because you kind of, what you say, the rhetoric isn't very much different.
So first of all, I think that we, for the last 10 years, saw a lot of results from professional politicians. I'm not sure that we can say professional politician in general, but I mean, they did a lot of mistakes, a lot of really bad decisions, and we saw during the war with Russia, during Russian aggression, that these mistakes cost us dearly. And that's why I'm pretty sure that it's not about new politicians or old politicians. It's about effective politicians or not effective politicians. And why I joined Golos, because right now, in the party list, there are a lot of people who, without any official office, achieved a lot. I mean, Sasha Ustinova, right, prominent anti-corruption activist. The whole idea of NABU, one of the most prominent and successful anti-corruption institutions in Ukraine right now, was invented in her kitchen. So, like Yaroslav Zhelezniak, he wasn't a member of the parliament, but he pushed through the parliament a lot of extremely important reforms, like healthcare reforms or famous Prozoro anti-corruption reform, etc. So, in the party list, already a lot of people with real experience, real achievements and impact. And I think with MP power, they can achieve much more. So this is a basic answer why I decided to join Golos. And what is the difference, between, for example, Sluga Naroda, Servant of the People, and Golos? I think that our main focus is very pragmatic, very efficient steps to achieve real changes for Ukrainians. And our main focus is de-oligarchization, because what we want to do just, the moment after we will be elected is to introduce a number of legislations to fight this triangle of, corruption and oligarch power between wealth, media, TV channels, first of all, and obviously power, because right now oligarchs have a lot of money because of their influence on politics. Because of it, they can pay for TV channels and control them. Through them, they can control government, they can influence parliament, and we want to disrupt. First of all, we want to prohibit them to control TV channels, because they're big businessmen. Let's them stay big businessmen, but not have control on media. And the second one, we want to reboot anti-monopoly committee to really stop their monopolization of Ukrainian markets.
How are you going to fight oligarchy? And whether for you, as somebody who was really doing a lot with the corruption, with the fight against corruption, what are you considering about the role of Mr. Kolomoisky?
Well, as of now, it's difficult for me. Maybe you may assist me to put my finger on any decision of President Zelenskyy in past almost 2 months that was actually in the interest of Mr. Kolomoisky. I can't see any such decision actually. So I think it's unfair, and it plays in the interests of some of our political competitors to try to present Mr. Zelenskyy as being dependent from Mr. Kolomoisky, which has no hard evidence so far.
I would probably also ask, using this opportunity, because we have so much of the content at Hromadske, that you also pay attention to a different story. We recently published, it's a story, our colleagues recently talked to Valeria Gontareva, who used to be the head of the National Bank of Ukraine and is currently based in London, working for London School of Economics. And her figure was pivotal in the nationalization of the largest private bank, Privat Bank. And what she said, you can go to our webpage en.hromadsky.ua. We see that she fears to be back to Ukraine, in particular due to the fact that she feels not very confident, especially when Mr. Kolomoisky is back to Ukraine. But there are more questions to the whole idea of the nationalization of the private bank and the follow-up. So I guess the audience of our program is quite interested in the story. So please read that. But I go on to our discussion. So what do you think are critical things to fight oligarchy in Ukraine? What are these laws? Which would be, for you, the things that, okay, these are the things we're going to fight it?
First, limiting the influence of oligarchs on TV channel, promoting antitrust legislation and proper implementation of antitrust legislation in order to prevent the situation which we have now, when Mr. Medvedchuk is actually controlling like 70% of talk shows on Ukrainian top TV channels, which is of course a tool of him promoting his view on political situation in Ukraine. Then of course actually providing for open access of all eligible businesses to state resources like extraction, like public procurement, etc. And of course, ensuring that punishment for corruption on all levels is inevitable and that anti-corruption infrastructure is working in a way it was designed to work.
What are you going to do with the coalition? And we see that, and how do you explain that your party isn't that popular? Because often, especially in this group of the people, and also among the audience, saying like, okay, there is Zelenskyy with the new people, there is Vakarchuk with the new people, but there is quite a different appeal. There is a huge support to the servant of the people, which somehow you can read as there is something in their program which people appreciate. There is something, besides everything. Why do you think the voice isn't that appealing?
So for me, it's quite obvious. Like, we created this party less than 2 months ago. So 2 months ago, when Golos was created, it had 0.9% support from Ukrainians, and now we're almost 9%. So it's a 10 times growth in less than 2 months. I think it's tremendous growth, and we cannot, complain on Ukrainian support, and we, work hard to get much more.
Still, that with these figures, because you are growing, but more or less for the last three weeks, it's more or less the same, 7%, 8%, sometimes less, sometimes more. According to the different polls. What are you going to do with the coalition? Is the party ready to join the coalition with the servant of the people?
So first of all, about growth, I think like 3 weeks ago, if we aggregate all polls results, it was around 5.9%, and now it's more about 8%. So I think it's serious growth. But to your question, I think it's preliminary and it's really early to discuss any coalitions because we don't know results of the elections, so it's like very speculative question. And the second one, just to generalize, because I think it's very preliminary question, but I will answer directly. We as a Golos, we are ready to create a coalition with any partners that share our values, that share our main program goals, and we can share and we can create coalition with any partners that hasn't. So. We will see after elections which party is ready to do it, and we will discuss it.
And how about the servant of the people? I know the ambitious to have the kind of mono party that was said, but one of the party ideologists, Stefanchuk. But what would you say in that, and who do the party consider as a possible coalition members? Because Ukrainian sociologists are quite brilliant. We can say that all the predictions which they done during the presidential elections, they were quite correct. So, of course, that could be the change. There are still 2 weeks still.
Well, first of all, I highly believe and trust in Ukrainian people for them to decide what kinds of coalition, if any, they want to see. Whether they want one-party coalition or a larger coalition, again, it's for Ukrainians to decide on July 21st. I can say that the servant of the people is ready to have a coalition with party representing new faces and representing demands of the society to reboot political elite.
So let's go to the demand of the Ukrainian public. When we look to the issues which are the voters are interesting, and I guess you are traveling now around the country, you're campaigning in the different towns. There are many questions, for instance, about the high tariffs. This is everybody from the MPs who've come back from the campaign telling that to us. How are you gonna to explain the people and how are you gonna to address these issues of like poverty, high tariffs, and things like that?
I can start.
Because a lot of people saying like this is a populism.
I think it's a popular demand, but it's quite pragmatic. But the thing is, the root of this problem is economic growth, right? If we can achieve rapid economic growth because of really fundamental reforms, then people shouldn't care about exact amount of tariffs because it will not be like a huge percentage of their income. If we can implement serious reforms, right, antitrust legislations, de-oligarchization in general, because right now 6 Ukrainian oligarchs control almost 30% of GDP, and it's crazy, and it's really harmful for Ukrainian economy. And if we can achieve rule of law, because without rule of law, it's not only about justice, it's about economic growth, right? We can achieve rapid growth of economic and then rapid growth of income for common people, for everybody. I think this is the main question. It's really populist to say, oh, we need to decrease tariffs and make them less than economically rational amount. But we need to what we really need to do, we need to focus on economic growth, and we know what to do.
To decrease the tariff, if one of the kind of hope of a lot of Ukrainians, if we look from the President Zelenskyy, if we look to the all kind of different kind of surveys, I can quote many of them. What would you say as well on that? How the party is going to answer that? Because if you don't do anything, the people could be disappointed.
Well, we're not competing with populist parties in promises to cut tariffs by 4 times, 5 times, etc. That's not our style. However, we know for sure that even taking corruption component out of forming energy prices will reduce these prices by 30% at least. This is one of the answers, and introducing proper competition on energy market is part of the answer also. Now we are actually in the process of establishing energy market. However, there is no market because the sector itself is dominated by monopolies, by 2 companies, and basically fighting that will also reduce tariffs.
And one of the reforms which is highly popular among civil society and some of the international donors, but quite unpopular among many people around the country, is the healthcare reform due to the different reason. So what is your position on that? Uliana Suprun hasn't become the member of the party voice, the candidate. Is it just because she's not very much popular among some of the people? And what would you also say about this reform? Because the President Zelenskyy was quite a kind of critical in his public speeches about that.
So first of all, I don't know why she decided not to participate in our party. What I know is that she probably is better as a minister or interim minister right now, because it's extremely important to implement reform. It's only started, and it's extremely important to push it further and further. And what we really believe that we need to finish healthcare reform successfully. It's already started, but there are a lot of things to be done, and one of the members of our party list, Olga Stefanishin, was a deputy minister of healthcare. She actively participated in implementation of this reform, so we will definitely do our best to help reform to progress and to finish it in the next few years.
So would you like to support the reform, or what the party position? How are you going to
is
deal with
to
that?
preserve everything that was possible, that was positive in the reform, and probably correct some mistakes. At the same time, we do understand that these kinds of reform, which actually must have been implemented a number of years ago. Right now, this reform will not be easy, will not be painless, and will not be quick, unfortunately. Again, for example, some successful components of reform, like procurement of medications by international organizations, is definitely something to be preserved, because this was, and I hope will continue to be, something that saved money, at the same time supplying Ukrainians with quality medications in necessary amounts.
And the second issue which people care is, of course, the war with Russia, but in particular situation with the Donbass. And some people might see the difference between your party positions. President Zelenskyy quite openly speaks about bringing back the hearts and the souls of the people in the eastern Ukraine, and in particular even some kind of the reconciliation. There are talks about, for instance, lifting the economic blockade of the Donbass. As also there are questions on whether the Ukraine should pay the pensions to the people residing on the occupied territories. Do you support that? What also are your talks about the economic blockade and things like that? Because I've heard that some members of the party in previous speeches of the Voice Party were quite critical. They kind of saw more kind of a military way of the conflict resolution.
Well, as of now, priorities are first establishing stable ceasefire, second, basically returning all our political prisoners and all who are kept as captives, and probably rebuilding territory of Donetsk and Lugansk regions under control of Ukraine, in order to create a kind of positive example that will also serve to bring souls of Ukrainians on uncontrolled territories back to Ukrainian state.
What is your idea on the economic blockade?
I think so. On the one hand, we really should pressure Russia and punish it for unlawful occupation of Crimea and parts of Donbass, right? On the other hand, we obviously should care about Ukrainians on temporary occupied territories. What I think we should do, we really need to gather together and create and clarify our policies and create unified policy about what we do right now with Russia and with temporary occupied territories, because right now it's quite contradictory. Do we trade with Russia with temporary occupied territories, or we don't? We really need to clarify it, right? We can't just say, oh, we don't want to discuss it. We need to discuss it, and we need to clarify it, and we need to create specific policies about it through expert discussion and through civil society discussion also.
But what you would consider, I'm very cautious about the term of the red lines, because if you put the red lines, your party says that there should be very clear red lines. Some people say that in this term there are too many symbolic red lines, where people fight for some of the symbolic things. So where are the things you probably would say that we won't agree, kind of direct communication with the separatists, or maybe, all the issues connected to the transitional justice and amnesty, and for instance, the pension issue. So probably, may you really clarify how the things are discussed in the party?
So I'm not the expert in this part of the program, but on the other hand,
that's something everybody would vote, in the end.
I mean, we should really clarify red lines, right? So no direct negotiations with terrorists. It's non-negotiable, in my opinion. No, compromises with Russia on Russian terms, and in general, I think compromises with Russia is extremely dangerous idea, because Russia never compromise on a good conditions for Ukraine. What we really need to do, we need to build pressure on Russia, and there are a lot of options, right, obviously, to do it through our international allies, through building a strong army, through economic development to support the strong army. But if we don't pressure Russia, then how we can ask our international allies to do it, right?
I still follow up, for instance, what do you consider to be a compromise? If there are the idea, for instance, expressed by the President Zelenskyy to lift the blockade, and at the same time, Vladimir Putin says, let's lift the blockade. There would be a lot of buzz that this is a compromise. Mm-hmm. So let's not do that by any ways, because Putin said that. But in the end, who benefit out of that? So what do you...
Yeah.
This will probably be the key question. It's not about compromise. It's whether we follow Ukrainian interests or not. And our strong intention is to follow Ukrainian interests in this issue.
So, because some of the things would require the losing of the popularity among some of the voters, especially connected to the conflict. So, really, how do you see the discussion between those parties? You have you might have a different voting base.
There are no all popular decisions. Moreover, we try to be honest with with people supporting us, saying that unfortunately we do have to admit that there are no easy, simple shortcuts to resolving situation on Donbass. For example, Mr. Poroshenko promised us 5 years ago that he will stop the war in like several weeks. What did he ended up doing? He had to apologize, saying that he was wrong. We don't want to repeat this mistake again.
And I would like to bring the attention to another story Hromadske have done. It's because we were speaking about the Ukrainian political prisoners. So it happened that our colleagues had found out that the Ukrainian political prisoner, Serhiy Litvinov, who was among those who were unlawfully held and convinced in Russia, we found out that he is serving his term currently for almost 5 months in Ukraine. So he was charged in Russia for murder and different kind of the things. As a political prisoner, though he is a usual Ukrainian who just went to find the healthcare help in Russia during the bombardments and the time of the escalation in 2014. So he was there accused of being the member of the Dnipro battalion. He used to be. But what was the issue? That he was returned to Ukraine. Nobody knew about that. He is still serving in prison. He doesn't meet his family. And that was quite an interesting case about also the transitional justice in Ukraine and the destiny of the Ukrainian political prisoner who all the Ukrainians considered to be held in Russia, not in Ukraine. So you can read the full story and watch the full interview on our webpage en.hromadske.ua. But I would encourage you to have this one short 1-minute clip so you'll have the feeling what we are talking about.
I have no idea what I'm doing here. I came from the colony in Russian Magadan in Siberia. This was Russia's verdict. They told me they arranged this with Ukraine, as if Ukraine agreed that I spend the rest of the sentence in a penal colony.
When did you return to Ukraine?
March 9th.
So you were transferred as a prisoner,
Yes.
and now you are sitting out your term here?
Yes, 8 years and 6 months.
The very same term?
Yes, the same Russian sentence which was not superseded by the fatherland. The charge remains the same.
Robbery?
Yes, robbery.
In 2014, you were captured from a hospital in Rostov-on-Don. What were you doing there?
Abscess, throat congelation. The contamination had spread to the jaw.
You were just taken from a hospital?
A man from Russian security service FSB just came.
How do you know he was from FSB?
He showed some ID. He said, let's go for a chat. I told him I was a Ukrainian citizen with no interest in politics. I said I came here as a peaceful citizen of my country.
And how did you end up in Rostov?
Stanitsa Luhanska was occupied by you know who. There were some Cossacks, militias. So I turned to Russia. Ukrainian border guards let me pass near Rostov. They said if Russians let you pass, go ahead. If not, come back. Russian border police didn't object.
Those people took you from the hospital and charged you with participation in the Dnipro 1 battalion. You were accused of killing civilians?
Yes, as if I was a punisher from Kolomoisky's Dnipro battalion. I never even knew any battalions, let alone be a member. I never bore firearms. I never did harm to any Ukrainians. I love my country. The war brought me suffering.
So please pay attention to this story and probably one of the questions on the war and conflict. So what are you going to do with the legislation on the transitional justice connected to the conflict? It was never really properly addressed with the previous parliament. It's quite a sensitive issue. As soon as you go there, some people would say, "Oh, that's compromise." But was it at all discussed? I haven't seen that much in none of your programs, to be honest.
Because this is the issue still to be discussed and worked through very carefully with all basically the stakeholders involved.
Yeah.
Again,
I
no
agree.
shortcuts. Unfortunately, I'd love to give one, but there is no such.
Yeah, I agree. I think the new parliament should discuss it quickly. But again, we don't have all the answers right now. But what we should do, we need to, like it was in this small video part, right? We need to clarify our position. We say constantly that Ukrainian justice system doesn't cooperate with Russia. And now we see, okay, Ukrainian citizen is in Ukrainian jail because of the decision of Russian court. And it's insane, right? Because I'm not a judge, but what I really know that we can't trust Russian courts.
Do you, our team now doing quite a few projects regarding covering the conflict and not the conflict, but the elections in the frontline areas, and we found out that there are almost no representatives from the Voice party close to the front line. Do you think it's not really that, because quite a low support for the party, that it's not your voters?
I think it's another thing. I think we created the party 2 months ago, less than 2 months ago. We just didn't have time, to find people who we can trust and select as our representatives and then be responsible in front of our voters after that. Because we can find obviously a lot of people who will run, but we really need to guarantee our voters that these people are really honest, that they share our values, that they will fight for these voters in the parliament. And we didn't have just time to do it. But on the other hand, for example, I personally from Donetsk, I was born in Donetsk, and in this side, I'm not a representative of Donetsk Oblast voting districts, but I will do my best to represent people from here.
This week we were following quite a few protests, for instance, against Andrei Kluyev, one of the former politicians who was very important to the President Yanukovych, might be registered as the candidate to the parliament. It didn't happen. Then it was decision of the court. There was also the talks about the coming back of Andrei Portnov, the deputy head of the president administration of Mr. Yanukovych. And this world revanche is somewhere on air. And many people say that, that's because we have President Zelenskyy in power, and all these people are coming back. They feel free, they feel better, they feel more secure. What would you say on that? Are you sharing also those thoughts?
Well, the case of Andrei Kluyev is pretty clear, basically. When I was working for Anticorruption Action Center, we were following how the cases against Yanukovych's cronies have been investigated by prosecutors general since 2014. And I would like to remind that Yuri Lutsenko, when he was entering his position of prosecutor general, actually promised that we would see cases against Andrei Kluyev included in half a year. This was 2.5 years ago, and this did not happen. So in my opinion, this revanche actually happened because prosecutors general system controlled probably, or at least supervised by President Poroshenko, was unable to actually bring to justice cronies of former President Yanukovych.
So I think it's really, first of all, in fundamental way, it's a very obvious crisis of Ukrainian judicial system, right? Because previous president and just power, they didn't do much to reboot judiciary system, constitutional court included. But on the other hand, okay, it's in the past. Right now, we need a strong, reaction from servant of people and from President Zelenskyy about it. If he can say, okay, it's unacceptable, we need to push back, we need to prevent obviously corrupt officials from running during elections, people who cannot run according to law. It would be extremely important, and I think we should discuss this also, because like Golos party actively participated in street actions against these decisions, and we very publicly, officially said that it's unacceptable and we will fight it back in the parliament.
Well, fighting corruption and introducing real effective judicial reform are among our top priorities. So our strong position is that people guilty of corruption should not be considered as candidates for any position, but they should face trial and if found guilty, serve their term in jail. Same about judicial reform. We do think that bodies which select judges, High Qualification Commission of Judges and High Council of Justice, these bodies proved not to be effective, proved not to work for effective judicial reform, and these bodies have to be rebooted with participation of internationals, because this was the model which worked for selection of anti-corruption court judges, for example, so no need to invent another bicycle here.
Anastasia, that's something you are focused. Do you think that the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, NABO, and Special Prosecutor Office should remain as they are?
They definitely should remain as institutions fighting corruption. President Zelenskyy had a meeting with the heads of these bodies. I think this was less than a month ago, and his message was pretty clear. He said, colleagues, you have 3 months to show result, to stop any possible quarrels again among yourselves, your bodies, your detectives and prosecutors. So when these 3 months expire, we will see who personally is responsible for not bringing result, and I do think that decisions will follow against this person.
Ivan, I read some of the comments of some of your MPs and their people who doing the communication, saying that like our opponents, mentioning sometimes, for instance, Viktor Medvedchuk, but we clearly know that the people who are voting for the voice, they are definitely not the people who are voting for the pro-Russian parties. So who is your real opponent? Is it the servant of the people or Petro Poroshenko? Because what we feel that like it's more or less the same voters you are fighting.
I think our main enemy is the old corrupted system, for real, because it's not about, political parties are not our enemies. Our enemy is really this old corrupted system. And
it represents somebody, it's not that abstract.
Yeah, I mean, I understand your question, but I think, obviously there are a lot of voters who support Poroshenko, who support Sluga Naroda, who can vote for us if they decide that we are better to represent their position. So we fight for each of these part of group of people, group of voters to gain their support. And we don't say, okay, these people is not our potential voters and these people are. We think, okay, it's Ukrainians, they have real needs and we'll fight for them and we'll hope they will support us.
So there is some kind of match between some of the voters here. So if to be very brief in maybe like less than a minute, you can say, why do you think your party is better? Because from our discussion, you quite sound very similar. And why it makes different?
Well, actually, I don't want to look for differences, but I can say that what we do have is a very precise plan on how to fight corruption. I can say this very in a very assured way, because this is my field of professional expertise. We have very precise plan how to fix judicial system, how to fix prosecutorial system, how basically to fix the economy, how to force the state work for the interests of people. And I think these are the messages that we are offering people, and then we do trust in people to make choices.
I think 2 main things. So first of all, like I said a little bit earlier, members of our party, our candidates already did a lot of things, tremendous amount of things without any political power at all. What we can do with political power, I think people should imagine and should support it. And the second one is very important. We already introduced and very transparently showed our list of candidates, and I believe it's a general consensus is the best list for these elections. And we will, push this further.
People would argue, maybe some parties think that their list is the best. We need to give a credit. I also should say that the voice of the party, just to remind our voters, is currently on the 4th position with 7.2 according to the latest polls of the rating group. The servant of the people is 42.3. I should also probably mention that we are trying at this program also to include the people from the opposition platform for life. They are very rare, and what we understand from informal talks, they are not very much interested in talking to anybody else apart from their audience. And but we should care that they are still the official. If they are voted, they are voted. Like that. Some people ask me like, what Ukrainians can do with Medvedchuk, but he's the leader of the second most popular party. So there is a question now. The fight is in the parliament. To finalize, there are a couple of things I'd like to ask Ivan. You've studied Stanford at the Ukrainian Emerging Leaders Programs. You spent a year there together with Sasha Ustinova, who was also there with you the same year. And as well, where a year before, Slava Vakarchuk was also studying. There are quite a few professors who are known among our audience, Mike McFall and Frank Fukuyama. So what did they tell you? Are they backing Svyatoslav Vakarchuk? What are teaching him or you? How it happened that all these alumni of this program are getting to a similar party and kind of they're pretty much endorsed by...
So I think it's quite easy. There's an independent admission committee at Stanford who select who will be participant of this program, right? And it's completely independent from any Ukrainian politics. Probably it's a party Golos priority to find such people and invite them to participate in running for the parliament. So I think this is a quite clear explanation. And what they teach us at Stanford, it's a topic for an entire conversation, but to summarize, I think two extremely important points. First of all, I like this quote that for each problem, there is a simple, obvious, and wrong solution. And we cannot simplify problems, especially like state problems, right? And say, okay, we can solve everything in a few months. Nobody can, but what we can achieve a huge progress. And the second idea is we really, and by we, I think all active Ukrainians, civil society activists, etc., we need to run for political, positions because we can do a lot as a civil society, right? But we cannot change the whole system without being, a part of the system and change the system from the inside. It's the main idea that Frank Fukuyama tried to push to the whole Stanford community, and I think it's quite, related to Ukrainian situation right now.
How would you explain that your members, for instance, you have in your organization who was fighting corruption and the Anti-Corruption Center, people going to different parties?
This was individual decisions of people. ANTAC, Anti-Corruption Action Center, was and remains independent, non-partisan organization. I stopped my membership in ANTAC when I took the decision to run for the parliament. So that's fine, and not to be connected to ANTAC in any way.
So yeah, be prepared. This is a different stage. To finalize it, thanks a lot for the discussion. We also have another kind of a big name talking about the Ukrainian politics. It's another person who, I won't say endorsing some of the candidates, but I had a chance to talk to Timothy Schneider, who is a famous American historian. And that probably was his first interview when he also expressed his views on the President Zelenskyy as well, all the talks about the Trump and kind of new type of the elections as well. I talked to him about Svyatoslav Vakarchuk, whom he know as well, because Svyatoslav Vakarchuk was studying at Yale, where Mr. Schneider was teaching. But by the end of this conversation, which would be in the end of the program, I also should say that the whole interview was done in with a different idea. Mr. Schneider is introducing quite an interesting idea, would be quite resonant in Ukraine on how Ukraine should codify the Russian language. So that was the initial idea of the talk. So you'll also have the chance to listen a short version of it, but the full version is of course on our webpage en.hromadsky.ua.
Whereas Mr. Zelenskyy is, he's 41 or something. He has children, right? I mean, he thinks about the future. He has to think about the future. He's going to be living in that future. He's got decades left. They're going to be, after he stops being president, he still has decades more to live. And I think, of course, a lot of people who voted for Mr. Zelenskyy were actually voting against Mr. Poroshenko. This is somebody who could have been a scientist and who chose to be an artist instead. I think that matters. I think a serious scientific education in the 21st century in our world of post-truth is a big deal, a very big deal. And the second thing which is interesting about him is that he is going back to social media, he's a very responsible user of social media. He has, millions and millions of followers, and he's always telling them things that are very sensible, right? He's always he's calming people down, he's showing people the other side of the story, he's telling people to reconcile, he's telling people to be nice to one another, he's pointing things out that not everybody knows, but he has this kind of gentle style, which is very interesting and unusual and mature. I think very important when you do have an important second language in your country to realize that you're not alone, to realize that this second language, because the world is the way that it is, has to be made your own. What I'm proposing is the way the rest of the world actually does things. But to put it a different way, Ukraine is giving Russia a completely unnatural advantage by not standardizing the Russian language. It's just, what it means is that Ukrainians can't tell whether Russian is coming from Russia or whether it's coming from Ukraine. I've had this idea for years and years. I was actually talking about it in 2014 when I organized a conference during or right after the Maidan. Ukraine has institutions that allow language and culture and so on to develop normally. But then there's one other aspect of this which is worth mentioning, and that is that it's an offensive weapon. It's not just defense. If you standardize the Russian language inside Ukraine, you're defending yourself against Russia. But you're also creating the possibility for offensive political work against Russia. In Russia, there's no freedom of speech, which means someone else has to take care of the Russian language. So we have freedom of speech, therefore we're going to take care of the Russian language. If there were going to be such an institute, for me it would have three parts. The first part would be you standardize the language, you print dictionaries, you create school books. The second part would be you give refuge to writers who come from Russian-speaking parts of the world, whether it's Kazakhstan or Azerbaijan or Russia itself or whatever. And the third is you have reporting about Russia. So I see this also as a way for Ukraine to turn the tables. The fact that you have the Russian language inside Ukraine is an advantage rather than a disadvantage. And up to now it hasn't been exploited. I think of it in my own mind as an Ukraiński Державний інститут російської мови та культури. If there was such a thing, we're talking about something which would cost a few million euros a year. We're not talking about competing on the whole area of the country. We're talking about doing a very technical operation, which is standardizing a language that millions of people use. So you're in a weird situation because you're basically allowing Russians to tell you how to speak Russian, or how to read Russian, or how to write Russian. That's not normal.
So that was the Sunday show at Hromadske International. I would also encourage you to stay with us 24/7, depending on the time zone you are living, because there is Twitter and Facebook, search Hromadske International. There we are producing the exclusive news and informing about what's going on in Ukraine and in the region, but now so much about Ukraine because there are the elections. You can also go to our webpage and sign up for a weekly newsletter. It's on the right top part of our webpage, and as well you can find the button where you can support Hromadske and donate, support in particular Hromadske International project. So thanks a lot for being with us, and I'm also very grateful to our colleagues whom we know for a while as an activist and the civil society leaders, but now we're coming to the stage when I'm talking to them as a politician. So it's Anastasia Krasnosilska, who used to be the member of the Anticorruption Center and currently is a number 8 in the party list of the Servant of the People, President Zelenskyy party, and Ivan Prymachenko, who was a co-founder of the online educational course Prometheus and currently is the candidate from the Svyatoslav Vakarchuk Golos party. So listen, follow us, and with this I say goodbye.